Now, I don't need to be the one to tell you that Classic WoW has never been balanced, because we always go in on a final patch state, and this has happened since 2019 with Original Vanilla going in a final patch state, knowing what classes are going to be top DPS, what classes are going to be stacked, what healers are best, and all of that is already known ahead of launch. We even know based on future tier set bonuses and even powerful trinkets which classes are going to spike and in which phase they're going to spike in, but is that actually the best way for Blizzard to approach the game? While you may think at first glance having all the classes in a final patch state is the best way to go, you've only got to look at retail and look at the amount of damage that each class is doing and how close every class is. Yes, you're always going to have something at the top and something at the bottom, but you don't want everything in between those two to be massively out. You want everything to be competitive. Now, actually up until Dragon Soul, that was fairly true for the vast majority of Cataclysm, but in Mists of Pandaria, that is not going to be the case. The reason I brought up retail is because it's relevant on a patch-by-patch basis, and what's top, what's bottom, what's in the middle, they can all shift around on a raid-by-raid basis. Because some raids are just naturally more friendly to melee, some raids are more friendly to ranged, and some raids it don't matter what you take. So they do shift around naturally based on encounters, but much like they would have in Mists of Pandaria originally, in retail now today, they'll be looking at the performance of different classes in the raid overall, over the course of let's say 2-3 resets, and then they'll be making changes. They'll be changing spell coefficients to just give a little bit of extra damage on one ability or take a little bit of damage away from another. Now, what you got to remember when we're in a 5.4.8 state is all of the classes would have been balanced for Siege of Orgrimmar. At that point, when they was in the 5.4.8 state, they didn't care what classes was doing in Tier 14, which is what we've just been testing on the beta being Moggosh and Volts. Because that's old content, it's kind of irrelevant. Instead, the classes are balanced around the trinkets that you can obtain in Tier 16, which is Siege of Orgrimmar, and the set bonuses that each class is going to be getting. And at that time in original Mists of Pandaria, they would have been trying to, like they do in retail today, keep all the classes competitive, keeping everything fairly close. Of course, there was outliers back then like there will be now, especially when we look at Tier 16 with the rise of Affliction Warlocks and how powerful they're going to be. But overall, the numbers would have been pretty close in Tier 16, in 5.4.8, in full BIS gear, because Blizzard would have been actively working to keep them close. So, to me, what this screams out is we do actually want a bit of intervention, because if we've took anything away from the beta weekend where we was just testing the first raid, it's that we already know what the overpowered healers are, we know what the overpowered DPS are, and tanks are kind of broken anyway because Vengeance isn't working properly, but we already get a good idea on what tanks are going to be the best as well. And if you looked at any 25-man streamers, because 10-man's a little bit different, don't get me wrong, you've not got as much opportunity to class stack, but in 25-man, everyone was running at least one full group of hunters. So like 5 hunters minimum, I saw upwards to 10. Now, while I know that really only applies to the top 1%, because not everyone's going to want to take loads of hunters, because just think about loot distribution. You've got all those people competing on one specific set of gear, and then loads of other gear potentially going to waste. So it's not going to be the standard or normal thing for most guilds to do outside of those top 1% that are pushing for either straight 100 passes or obviously getting world first and things like that. But it does make you question your raid team, and if you've got, let's say, a Rep Paladin in the group, you're like, well, we could drop that Rep Paladin, take an extra Hunter. Because you know the Hunter's just going to bring so much more. You have no problem covering raid buffs when you got a Hunter in the group because they can bring quite literally anything, and they're doing significantly more damage than all of the other classes, and that's across the raid. We're not talking about a single isolated boss like, say, Stoneguard, for example, where something like a Windwalker Monk can absolutely blast because it's just cleave for the entire fight, or even an Arms Warrior, or just anything else that's really strong on cleave. We're talking about across all 6 bosses. So this really does raise the question to me, should Blizzard actually try and keep things a little bit tighter this time around? Because Mists of Pandaria and class stacking is going to be happening left, right, center. Everybody, including 10-mans, if you can take more of the most powerful class and it's going to make your life easier, of course you're going to take more of the most powerful class. Now, there will be a shift. So while in Phase 1, I've been saying all along that it's going to be survival hunters that are going to be absolutely blasting and dominating, and it will continue through Throne of Thunder progress as well, but then you will start to see the casters take over as they get really strong trinkets. So things like Frost Mage, Destruction Warlock, even though they're doing really well, even in the first tier of content, it does shift as you get really powerful trinkets and ultimately set bonuses as well. Now, the set bonuses in tier 14 are fairly lackluster, don't get me wrong, and that's across the board. most classes tier set bonuses in tier 14, much like they would be in any opening tier of content, are normally pretty boring. But people will just go from wanting as many hunters as possible to as many destruction warlocks as possible and then to as many affliction warlocks as possible. And again, I just don't think that feels good. I would personally like to see Blizzard take on a bit more of a hands-on approach when it comes to Mr. Pandaria, where up until this point they kinda haven't had to. Because even though there has been class stacking all the way back since 2019 when we were just running loads and loads of warriors in a 40-man raid, and it's happening again now on the anniversary edition because there's been no changes, so why would it change? But I think Blizzard just reviewing what classes are doing every 3 or 4 resets. I'm not saying make changes every single week like they did certainly throughout the first few phases of Season of Discovery, but they did keep all the classes fairly viable in Season of Discovery, and the meta shifted on a phase-by-phase basis, but they was working very much like the retail team and trying to keep all of the classes as close together as possible. And that's all I want to see. It would be nice to be in Phase 1 and not feel like you're holding your team back by playing a Retribution Paladin, or you're holding your team back by playing a Marksman Hunter, or you know what I mean, any class and spec. You should be able to go in and raid on any class and spec without it feeling like massively detrimental to the raid. And while I do think you could do that anyway, you could literally take what would be considered to be the 10 worst specs to a raid and you'd be able to clear it on heroic. The people that play those 10 worst specs obviously don't want to be considered the 10 worst specs. So if you love playing Elemental Shaman, you don't want people to take you just because you like playing Elemental Shaman. You want to be able to get as much damage out as possible and be competitive with everyone else. And while Hunters are the way they are, that's going to be impossible. It's going to be impossible to compete with Hunters, like full stop, no matter what class you are and no matter how good you are, outside of, like I say, those isolated bosses where it just favours certain specs more. So really I'm putting the question out to you. Would you like to see Blizzard do a little bit more this time round in Mr. Pandaria? Would you like to see them take on a bit more of a hands-on approach when it comes to tuning classes, maybe using old masteries? I've used Windwalker Monk as an example in a previous video when I've spoke about things that I'd love to see changed, and I'd love to see the pre-5.4 version of mastery that we was running during Throne of Thunder. The only reason that got changed is because they couldn't quite work out how to balance a Windwalker Monk around Rune of Reorigination, which is this incredibly powerful trinket which every Feral Druid is going to want as well. The way Windwalker Mastery worked back then would just be Mastery would flat out increase the amount of damage that you got from using Tiger's Eye Brew, which is basically your big cooldown. So being able to use Rune of Reorigination, you kind of worked a little bit like a Feral Druid does and gained the same benefit, where a Windwalker would increase their Tiger's Eye Brew and you'd be able to use it to get loads of damage out. A Feral Druid uses it to get really, really high snapshotted bleeds out. Now, I'm not saying they're going to go back and change masteries or anything like that, but I actually think they should really consider it. Any way they can bring classes in line in each phase, even if that does mean using some of the older masteries and then it slowly progresses on, very much like the Elemental tier set bonus where your Fire Ellie would reset during Firelands and then it reverted back to its 4.3 state when Dragon Soul actually launched. Things like that are things they can do to help different classes out. And then the easy one is obviously if they're looking and seeing classes massively below everybody else, just literally increasing the coefficients of some of their abilities just to bring them up a little bit. Now, I already think Mist of Pandaria is going to be one of the most fun classic expansions to play, and I think if they took a bit of a hands-on approach, they could make it even better. They could make it even better than Mist of Pandaria was originally, but it will just need a bit of effort from Blizzard to actually make that happen. The one thing I will say is they do seem very engaged with Mr. Pandaria, where during the beta for Cataclysm they didn't, and I do think that part of that was to do with the fact that Season of Discovery was sort of in full swing at the time when Cataclysm beta was out, and now while Season of Discovery is winding down, they've got a bit more time to focus on other versions of the game, being the Mr. Pandaria beta. So credit where credit's due, they do seem to be handling this beta a hell of a lot better than Cataclysm, and it's great to see some of the devs actually in-game talking to the community as well. But if they can go that one step further and just have that hands-on approach with class scaling throughout the expansion, I just think it would be onto a winner. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you think it would be good for the game for Blizzard to actually take a bit more of a hands-on approach and keep the classes all pretty close, all viable, all fun to play, or do you think they should just leave it alone and we'll accept the fact that every phase we're going to be stacking a different class, and every phase there's going to be those undesired specs. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm streaming over on Twitch and Kick, so twitch.tv/Scottejaye87 and kick.com/Scottejaye. I'll see you over there, hopefully. Consider joining the channel as a member. The Mr. Pandaria Rested XP guides actually go live tomorrow, so you can get them pre-ordered tomorrow, ready to use from the pre-patch onwards. So make sure you click the link in the description and pick one of those up so you can level really fast from 85 to 90. And I'll see you on the next one.